This is episode 227 of the Pharmacist Voice podcast. I'm the host, Kim Newlove. Welcome to episode 8 of 15 in my Pharmacist Authors Summer Series. I hope you're having a great summer. My guest today is Dr. Jade Ranger. She's the author of Mustard Seed Mentality, Unscripted Pearls of Wisdom from a Wife, Mother, and Entrepreneur. If you're new to the Pharmacist Voice podcast, welcome. Again, I'm Kim Newlove, the host. I'm a pharmacist by training, but I'm not in clinical practice anymore. I am a voice actor and a podcast host. I went to the University of Toledo College of Pharmacy, and I graduated with my BS Pharm in 2001. Among other things, I narrate audiobooks for pharmacists. If you have a project in mind, whether it's an audiobook, a medical narration project, or something podcast related, contact me through my website, thepharmacistvoice.com. Let me tell you a little more about my guest, then we'll dive right into our interview. Dr. Jade Ranger earned her PharmD from Hampton University in 2012. After spending almost a decade of her career working for big chain pharmacies, she, alongside her husband, Dr. Henry Ranger, opened The Prescription Shop, a full-service, true mom-and-pop pharmacy in March of 2019. Jade's a member of a number of professional and service organizations, and she has won several awards. Congratulations, Jade. This includes 2 40 Under 40 awards in 2022. In addition to receiving numerous accolades and awards, Dr. Ranger continued her education in 2022 by obtaining a board certification in anti-aging medicine through the American Board of Anti-Aging Health Practitioners. After that, she also completed a fellowship in anti-aging, metabolic, and functional medicine, which is abbreviated FAAMFM. That's FAAMFM. When her schedule permits, she loves reading, yoga, and above all, spending quality time with her family. Jade lives in Williamsburg, Virginia with her husband and their 2 children, Jacob and Joshua. The family attends New Zion Baptist Church, where they have been active members since 2011. Without further ado, here's my interview with Dr. Jade Ranger. Hi, Dr. Ranger. Welcome to the Pharmacist Voice podcast. How are you?
I'm good. It's so great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm looking forward to speaking with you and your audience today.
Thank you. I'm so glad you could be here in my Pharmacist Authors Series. I know we met on LinkedIn. We've talked about the book online before, but now we get to talk about it in person. This is fantastic.
Absolutely.
I know the book is Mustard Seed Mentality. Can you tell me a little bit about it? What's it about?
Sure, I can. So what I would say is that anyone who knows me personally or follows me on LinkedIn or otherwise knows that I am a very faith-based person. So Mustard Seed Mentality, Unscripted Pearls of Wisdom from a Wife, Mother, and Entrepreneur basically talks about my life and the ways and the various ways I've had to rely on my faith. Whether we're talking about through marriage, through motherhood, through my entrepreneurship journey. And it's based on one of my very favorite Bible verses, which is Matthew 17:20. And it reads, "So Jesus said to them, because of your unbelief, for surely I say to you, if you have faith as a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you." And again, that's Matthew 17:20. So it's just this idea that no matter really what you're going through in life or in your various walks of life, it doesn't take a ton of faith. We're talking about a mustard seed. Some people say that's almost the smallest thing. It's like basically bigger, not even that much bigger than a grain. And so that's the general idea and the whole basis of the book, just using a very small amount of faith to take you from point A to point B.
I have definitely heard that one in church before. That is a memorable one.
Yes, for sure.
Yep, I remember my pastor coming out with the mustard seeds in the little canister in the McCormick spice jar, and showing the kids, this is a mustard seed. And if you can just believe this much, then it'll take you places.
It's so true. I have so many. It's funny because before and after I wrote this book, I've had people who have gifted me little mustard seed gifts. I have a necklace that has a little mustard seed and just serves as a reminder, again, that no matter what you're going through, because we all have trials and tribulations in life, they look different for each of us. Our journeys, are similar, but different struggles, and sometimes the same struggles. But regardless, we all need that thing that helps us keep pushing forward, when the going gets tough or even when things are going well, right? Because we don't just need faith when we're trying to make it through a hard situation. We need faith when we're trying to make major life decisions. And so for me, a portion of this book really focuses on my journey to pursuing entrepreneurship with my husband. I'm a pharmacist by trade, and my husband and I opened the Prescription Shop, which is a small independent pharmacy in Williamsburg, Virginia. It is not a franchise. It is not a chain. It is independently owned by the two of us. There are other prescription shops around the country, but we don't have any ties to them. And so this has truly been a ground up operation, applying for a small business loan, acquiring our space, and really creating this from scratch. And anyone else who's talked to me or heard my story, or maybe he's already read my book, they know that took a lot of faith for me. I can be very type A. I've got a big time case of OCD. I'm a major planner. And so, when my husband approached me with this idea, he's also a pharmacist, and he's like, hey, I think we should open our own pharmacy. I'm thinking, are you crazy? Like, we've got a young family, we've got two little boys. I'm a total boy mom, and they were only 5 and 1 year old at the time. So that was just a really hard thing for me to wrap my mind around, taking this major leap of faith. And even though, things could work out and it could go great, there was a major risk involved. And so that really required me to keep moving forward in faith when I didn't honestly know what the other side of that was going to look like. We're extremely thankful and blessed that we just celebrated 4 years, March 6th. So we're so excited about that opportunity to be able to be here and serve our community the way that we see fit, bringing back true patient care. But it definitely took a faith walk to get from the original idea to where we are now.
Much respect from a fellow boy mom. I've got 2 boys, ages 20 and almost 18. And for you to have young ones, I mean, it takes a lot of faith to do that. And I've heard that the first 3 to 5 years are really the hardest when you're an entrepreneur. How have the first 3 or 4 years been going for you?
It's such a journey. We've learned so much. We have made so many fantastic connections, and fostered so many great partnerships here locally in our community. And we kind of had a unique situation because we celebrated our 1 year anniversary, and exactly a week after we had that celebration and that party with all of our family and friends, the pandemic hit. And it was like this moment of, oh no, like we just celebrated our 1 year anniversary. We were thankful we made it through the first year. Now, what are we going to do? And we had to make a lot of changes and adjustments. But thankfully, we had our community who rallied around us. We had our own village of family and friends who completely supported us. And so we were able to have a significant impact here locally in Williamsburg, Virginia. Throughout the pandemic, we have administered almost 20,000 COVID shots to our community. So we played a big part. We were one of the first pharmacies in Williamsburg to get the COVID vaccine. And so I think it's one of those things that just goes back to the original thought process of having little faith, because you don't know what God has in store for you, how he will use you, the impact that you will have on other people's lives. And I feel like to see that come to fruition over the course of these 4 years has been one of the most humbling and worthwhile experiences of my life.
Congratulations on having a growing impact. It sounds like you started small and grew bigger and bigger in your impact. That's great. Now, can I ask, why did you write this book?
I wrote this book because I have a love of writing. I have always loved reading and writing. I'm an avid reader. I'm constantly reading something, and I have a stack of books that are always kind of queued up for my next book once I complete one. I'm currently reading The Pain Gap, which is a phenomenal book. Talks about basically how women are unfortunately dismissed to death in the healthcare system, that our concerns, our health issues are a lot of times diminished. And, they think that we're being overly emotional or, suffering from being more hysterical than anything else. And it also highlights, particularly for women of color, how it's even worse. And so it's a very good read. But essentially, I decided when I wanted to put out a message into the world, what would that be? And it wasn't because I was looking to be a New York best-selling author. It was more so I just thought to myself, you know what? I've had some life experiences, and not that I'm an expert or I know everything, but I have some things I'd love to share, particularly with other women. So I would say the audience for this book is truly anyone. I've had plenty of men who've come to me like, man, I really got a different perspective reading your book, especially through the marriage section.
Nice.
And I've always enjoyed to hear their feedback. But my target audience was particularly women and women who are mothers, and not just working mothers, because we all know that whether you're working inside or outside of the home or both, our plates are very, very full. And so I just wanted to kind of give people encouragement, empower other women, to remind them that you're not alone in your journey. We're all struggling with the same types of things. And, we're all working to try to, you know, accomplish that work-life balance without getting burnt out and things like that. And so I wanted to kind of let people know, hey, while I have some of the same struggles that you do, these are some of the ways that I've approached it, and some of the things that have worked for me and some of the things that have not worked for me. And so if you find it beneficial for you, then great, kind of glean from the book what you think is beneficial to your specific situation. Outside of that, share with others.
Awesome. I love that men have also read it, even though your
They
target audience was women. Men can learn things from books.
They can. And it's funny because I think the good perspective that a lot of them were joking with me about was just essentially when I'm talking about the communication and the fact that communication is key in all relationships, but particularly intimate ones such as marriage, and how so often we can just take for granted that the other person, because we've known them for years and we've been with them forever, that they just know how we're feeling or what we're thinking. The reality is we can never take that for granted. We can't be upset with our husband, from the woman perspective, because he didn't just know what you were thinking or he didn't just get it. If you did not explicitly explain it to him, then we have to realize that men and women truly do come from two different planets, it seems like. And what our priorities are and what we're in tune with is not necessarily always the same thing for them. And sometimes that means we have to spell things out. But a lot of times, while we feel like, oh, I shouldn't have to dictate to my husband, they appreciate that because they feel like, oh, finally, you're just speaking clearly to me. I don't have to try to guess what you want me to do. You're just telling me flat out what you want me to do, and then I can do it. So we can both avoid the frustration that comes along with me assuming and then him trying to live up to some, unmentioned expectation that he feels like he's never going to truly be able to live up to.
Yeah, silent contracts, they need to be ripped up, right? I love what
Yeah.
you're saying. Sometimes you got to spell it out. Guys kind of like that because they don't like to guess. That clear communication's important. They're not mind readers. I totally get it. Totally
Yeah.
agree. Yeah.
Absolutely. That was one thing that, like I said, I think a lot of the men were kind of like, oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate that piece of the book.
It sounds like your audience is not only women and, of course, a few men, but what I want to know is what kind of women? The women who are in the thick of raising their children, or are these the women who have survived and their children are adults?
I would say surprisingly both, because the women that were more so targeting were the women who are in the same season of their life that I'm in. I, have two little boys that are 9 and 5. They're busy little boys, that adds so much to my daily routine and what I have on my plate as I'm managing my family, home life, and also my small business. And so that was the audience I was particularly targeting. But I've been pleasantly surprised, kind of the way that I've had men reach out to me and say, oh, I really enjoyed reading your book, that I've had older women who've passed through this season. Their kids are grown. They now have grandkids of their own. And some of them already have grown grandkids. And they said, you know what? I wish I had your book when I was in that stage and phase of my life, because I felt like it was so genuine. It was so relatable. There were so many things that you were saying that if I had just taken a few minutes and had someone have that conversation with me, maybe I wouldn't have felt as stressed, or maybe I wouldn't have felt as lost in that moment. And so I also appreciate hearing things like that. I have a monthly column in a local newspaper here in Williamsburg, Virginia, the Virginia Gazette, and it's actually a parenting column called Parent Life Unscripted, with the RX in there, because I always have to include pharmacy some way. And I get a lot of positive feedback from that as well. And it's the same type of thing. People who are currently in the thick of parenting, but then people who are like, I've passed through that season, but I still really enjoy reading your articles every month.
We should get Amazon to pair up your book with what to expect when you're expecting. And then women can kind of get a little bit of like, while you're pregnant, learn about this. And then
Right.
after you have the kids, maybe you could read this as well. That'd be
Yeah.
kind of cool.
It's real, because the one thing that I truly realized, and I know I'm not alone as a woman who, there's so many things you just don't know about motherhood, right? Like, it doesn't matter how many books you read. It doesn't matter, what other people tell you. Until you are truly in the trenches, you'll never fully get it. And I think, but it's still helpful to have other women explain things. And I think sometimes we don't do a good enough job as women about being transparent about some of the issues that we struggle with, and whether it's related to, motherhood or marriage or working or even, hormonal issues and things that we start experiencing as we move into the phase of being perimenopausal and menopausal. I talk to so many women patients who was like, we're having a conversation. I start talking to them and asking them questions like, hey, so, this is probably something that has to do with hormones. And for so many of them, that hasn't even registered in their mind. And this is like mind-blowing information. I think it's unfortunate because knowledge is power. So the more that we have these open lanes of communication, we're able to talk and engage with one another, we realize how much we truly relate, and we're dealing with the same things. And maybe during different seasons of our lives, but we can still all appreciate and relate with one another.
Indeed. Now, I understand you've got a sample of the book you're going to share with me and my audience, and maybe it's got some of that relatable information.
Yes, yes, yes. So I'm going to be starting on page 43, and this section is entitled Set Goals, Track Your Progress. And it says, I read a quote recently by Catherine Patterson that said, a dream without a plan is just a wish. No matter where you are in life, it's never too late to set new goals. Once you do, be sure to track your progress. Earlier in this chapter, I mentioned how little girls with dreams become women with vision. That's true. But I also want to emphasize that little girls are not the only ones with dreams. Even if you didn't have it all figured out at 17 years old, in parentheses, I didn't either. I just had an idea. And maybe you still don't know. That's totally fine. I want to clarify that while I did choose to pursue the profession of pharmacy early on, it still took me several years of strategic planning, hard work, and perseverance to actually achieve my goal. Some people are still finding their passion well into their 30s and 40s, and there's nothing wrong with that. Thankfully, I do love my career and have been able to make an impact on my profession. I could have just as easily put in all of this time and energy to realize that pharmacy wasn't for me. I have a few classmates who discovered that to be true for them post graduation. There may be some of you who are reading this book right now who are questioning your career choices. Whether you're looking for your next big break or feel totally fulfilled in your current role, it's always a good idea to set goals for yourself, both professionally and personally. Once you establish short-term and long-term goals for yourself, don't stop there. It's always good to chart out an expected time frame of when you would like to have accomplished each one of your goals. Some people even create vision boards for what they hope to achieve over the next 5 or 10 years. Having a game plan allows us to stay focused and to stay the course. In life, things will always come up, and maybe you have to make some adjustments from time to time, and that's okay. As you have a general idea of where you are going, you can take active steps to prepare for what you are hoping to eventually accomplish. And remember, goals are not only for major life aspirations like maybe owning your own home or starting your own small business. Little goals like trying to be more disciplined in your daily approach are just as important. Something that I have personally always struggled with is being on time, and having small children has made it that much harder for me. I remember my freshman year in college when one of my administrators used to tell us repeatedly, to be early is to be on time is to be late, and to be late is unacceptable. That mantra is one that has stuck with me no matter how many times I may fail to actually implement the practice in my daily life. Recently, I've been getting better with being on time because I took personal stock of my own patterns and realized that I wasn't giving myself enough time in the mornings to get myself and the boys ready for school that day. Instead of getting frustrated when Joshua decides to run around and play, when I'm trying to get him ready for camp, I started allotting additional time for his behavior. So now instead of having just enough time to get ready, I started waking up earlier to give myself an additional 40 minutes for any potential shenanigans that may occur during our morning routine. It seems like a small adjustment, but it has made a world of difference. When my mornings start out stressful, it often sets the tone for the rest of my day. If I am scrambling all morning, I usually feel overwhelmed, and the potential for me to be off my game at work increases. In my profession, I can't afford to make mistakes or be distracted. We each have areas where we can improve, so put together a game plan of what you need to do to have better results. After you start implementing your game plan, check in with yourself periodically to determine whether or not your game plan is in fact working and beneficial. When we track our progress, it gives us the opportunity to evaluate, critique, and ultimately make necessary adjustments. None of us has time to waste. Therefore, you want to work smarter and not harder. That's why evaluation is so crucial. If we don't make time to confirm that our method is having a positive effect, we could waste our time tracking in the wrong direction. And even if you are not on the wrong path altogether, you could find that there's a more direct route. Here's where I'll repeat just for emphasis and for those who may not have tried being more intentional when it comes to charting your progress. Setting goals and tracking your progress is essential to your success.
I love it. Thank you for sharing that. It's kind of involves time management, really. That's a little bit organizing and time management. I love those topics. So great selection. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. Me too. It's funny because people are always so shocked that I struggle with being on time because I'm such an organized individual and I've got the case of OCD, but really it kind of all plays hand in hand because what happens is I'm trying so much to overachieve and make sure I have everything set ahead of time for the next day. But then what's happening is I'm slowly getting behind where I currently am, trying to be over prepared. So it's kind of like an oxymoron when you really think about it.
I don't know about you, but sometimes I'm late by the exact same amount of time wherever I go, 5 or 6 minutes, And what you were talking about in that selection, backing up the children getting ready for school routine by like 15 minutes or whatever you said, that really addresses the issue because if you just start a little earlier, you might just end up on time. And how's that going for you?
It is going well. Some days it's still a struggle. I will be honest, but the taking the proactive approach of saying, you know what, instead of just trying to allot enough time for me to get there, on time, let me just leave a little additional extra room because the reality is life is unpredictable. You never know what's going to happen when someone can't find something, when someone spills something on the floor, when you have to, get stuck in traffic. So whatever the case may be, it's always a good idea just to have a little bit of extra time.
Absolutely. Great life lesson. And again, thank you for sharing that. I love it when people read their selections of their books on this Pharmacist Authors Series. I feel like I'm inviting them to be an audiobook narrator for just like a brief moment. So that's awesome.
It's funny. I've had some people ask me, like, are you into audiobook? And I keep saying, like, oh, I'm going to look into it. I'm going to look into it. I haven't had the time yet, but it is something that I definitely desire to do down the line, 100%.
Well, in case you didn't know this, I'm not trying to advertise my services, but I narrate audiobooks for women pharmacist authors, and I'm not trying to narrate yours because you just said you want to do it. But I do know the process, and if you ever want to talk about it, let me know.
I absolutely will. And that's why connections, forging these relationships are so important because you never know how you can be an asset or a resource to someone else. So I will absolutely reach out to you because I would need all the guidance. I have no experience at all in that arena.
Not a problem. And I've actually got one of my audio engineers that I've worked with on audiobook projects coming onto this series as well. So you'll have to check out the interview with Julie Walthers. Julie
I
Walthers.
will, absolutely.
Yep. All right, cool. Well, hey, let's move this interview forward, shall we? I want to ask you the next question. It is, why should your audience read this book? What's the number one problem that it solves?
I think the number one problem that it solves is ultimately giving yourself grace. I think sometimes as women, we can be so hard on ourselves. We suffer from what's called this superwoman syndrome. And it's so real because we're so used to taking care of everyone else and taking care of everything. We manage our homes and we're working and we have, community responsibilities or commitments and we're involved in many things. And so what can happen is you get so wrapped up in all of these various roles that you forget to sometimes take a pause and truly take care of yourself. And that's something that I really dive into this book about the self-care piece and how I've had experiences where I'm going, and then I have this complete burnout. And then I'm sitting there having this come to Jesus moment with myself, like, how did I get here again? Like I was supposed to be being more intentional about providing myself additional time, the power to say no, and accepting that I can't be everywhere. I can't do all the things all the time. And so I think through this book, while I talk about, marriage relationships, and while I talk about parenthood and motherhood relationships and entrepreneurship, that journey, I also talk about the ongoing underlying narrative is the relationship that you have with yourself and how you can bet on yourself, but how you can also tap into that spiritual piece to give you that additional oomph that you need to get through these various other areas of your life overall.
I like how the answer you just gave fit in very well with what you were saying at first with the mustard seed mentality and the verse that you quoted from the Bible, giving yourself grace. I think that fits together really well.
And it's something that is, we talk so much about it in this society, especially, since COVID hit, everyone's like, oh, self-care, self-care, self-care. But it's like, what
Mm.
does that truly mean? And I think instead of just putting it out there as like a buzzword or phrase or topic, we really need to dive into that and say, what does self-care look like for me? And for me, whether that's a hot cup of tea at night and winding down after I put my boys to bed and reading my Bible app and kind of recentering myself and my spirit, my synergy, it may look different for me than it does for you or some of our listeners. But whatever you need to kind of bring yourself down and refocus, because there's so many things that are, trying to take our attention on a daily basis, whether it's a news feed, whether it's what you got going on at work, what you got going on at home, what your family has going on. There's always all of these competing things looking to get our attention. And even for, adults, we can feel overwhelmed and overstimulated, similar to the way that children can. And so we have to acknowledge that and then be intentional about how we combat it.
Well said. This kind of goes directly into the next question. I was going to ask you, what do you want people to do with the information after they finish the last page, after they finish the book?
I want them to reflect on how the tips that I talk about throughout the book, how they can make adjustments to make it relevant for their life, how they can apply it to their daily life, and then how they can share that same message, particularly with other women, because I'm someone who believes very strongly in women empowerment and how we really have to truly lift each other up. And so it's funny because I had someone mention to me once that while I wasn't necessarily giving this illustration, it's very in line with the book. And he said, you're spreading your mustard seed of faith and you're giving it to someone else. And then they're growing it and they're giving it to someone else. And they're growing and they're giving it to someone else. And I thought that that analogy was so powerful because it's so true. It only takes one nice deed that you do or something that you do to encourage someone else. And for you, it could have been a very small, gesture. You don't have any idea how that's going to impact their life. And so I think that's a very powerful idea.
I love that concept of sharing it. And you just made me think of something. You know how there are book clubs, women's book clubs, and even Bible studies? I think this would be a great book. Mustard Seed Mentality would be a great book for a church group or a women's group, or even like the library, the community, for them to take this book and read it and share it with one another. That's awesome.
It has been awesome. Like I said, I've received resounding just applause for the messages that are weaved throughout this book. I've had so much support here, particularly locally in Williamsburg, Virginia. I did a book signing at our local Barnes and Noble, and they have it propped up on display in their local authors section. And it's so cool because people
Nice.
will be there and they'll shoot me a picture like, oh my gosh, I saw your book in Barnes and Nobles. And so it's really cool because it is, like you said, just the opportunity to share the message. And I've had, people reach out about doing book discussions and stuff like that. And it is a very good discussion starter because, like I said, we have while yes, we're different in many ways, there's so many ways that we're similar and we're alike. And in particularly with women, I think that the more we talk to each other, the more we realize like, man, we really experience some of the same things. And then we can be a sounding board for one another and also offer support. And that's really important.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, congratulations on writing this book. And has it sold well? I mean, what's the audience response so far?
It's been great. I only actually have maybe a handful of reviews on Amazon, but it's 5 stars right now. I have sold almost 1,000 copies. And so, it's like I said, I didn't really have an idea in my mind of what I was expecting the book sales to be like. I kind of just felt like, hey, I have this message that I want to share. I'll put it out there and we'll see what happens. And I've been blown away by the response and the people who have reached out to me, who've read the book and who've asked me to come and do podcasts or, speeches about the book. And so it's just so funny because, again, you don't know how God will use you. You don't know the impact that you'll have on people. But evidently, Mustard Seed Mentality has had an impact on people here on my local level, but even nationally.
Well, congratulations on your success. And how can my audience find your book?
Sure, they can find it on Amazon. They can online on Amazon, also Barnes and Nobles, as well as Walmart and Books A Million.
Very good. And you mentioned that you have not done the audiobook, but I believe I looked on the website. It's available in hardbound books and also paperback, right? Paperback.
Yep.
And then it's an e-reader as well, right?
Yes, it is.
All right. Now, I'm just curious, How do you prefer to read books? Are you an ebook person? Do you like the hardbound? Are you a paperback girl? What's your preference?
My preference, I can be a bit of a book snob when it comes to my books. I do not like reading from Kindles. And part of that is because I spend so much time staring at a computer screen at work and even my laptop at home when I'm working from home. So I always read books, holding them. I love flipping through the pages. I love having bookmarks. That's just my thing. I prefer hardback books because they're just so sturdy. But I still have several paperback books, but I just enjoy reading a book from cover to cover. I will do audiobooks from time to time if I'm taking my husband's from South Carolina, so we go down there once or twice a year. So when we're headed in that direction, I will listen to audiobooks. I do think that's cool. I grew up doing that. My grandmother lived about 6 hours away from me, my maternal grandmother. And so whenever we went to go visit her for the holidays, we were always listening to audiobooks. And that was a very fun form of entertainment. Instead of like actually watching movies, we were listening and you could hear the authors and their inflections and their voices and things like that. And it was always interesting because it allowed you to kind of create the picture in your mind. So I don't mind audiobooks, but if I'm not doing an audiobook, which I'm usually reading a hardback book. So that's my favorite way to read books.
All right. I'm an audiobook girl, but I do like a physical print book too. I have a feeling when I buy yours, I'm going to want the physical book so I can write in it and circle things.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. I love that. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be featured here. Great conversation. Thank you for your support. Anytime you want me to come back, I love being here and speaking with listeners, and I would love for listeners to engage with me. So feel free to follow me online or whatever the case may be and find a way to connect because I'm such a people's person. I'm a chatty Cathy. I love talking and building new relationships. So
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Jade Ranger. And I will definitely put a link to your book in the show notes and also a link to you on LinkedIn because that's how we met. And hey, I bet other people would like to engage with you there as well. So thank you again for being on the Pharmacist Voice podcast, and you take care.
thank you. You guys have a great afternoon.
Great interview. Thanks again to Dr. Jade Ranger for being on my podcast today. And I just want to announce that Jade will be back on the podcast on October 13th of 2023. We're not done talking. We've got a lot more to talk about. All right, that's all I've got for you today. Let's wrap this up. Thank you for listening to episode 227 of the Pharmacist Voice podcast. Please visit thepharmacistvoice.com to read the show notes. In the show notes today, you will find a link to Mustard Seed Mentality, Unscripted Pearls of Wisdom from a Wife, Mother, and Entrepreneur. You'll also find a link to The Prescription Shop, that's Jade and Henry Ranger's pharmacy, a link to Jade on LinkedIn, and more. If you know someone who would like this episode, share it with them. And if you like this podcast, please subscribe to or follow the Pharmacist Voice podcast on your favorite podcast player and YouTube to get each new episode right when it comes out. I'll be back on Monday, July 3rd with a drug name pronunciation episode. Then we'll come back to the Pharmacist Authors interviews on Friday, July 7th. Have a safe and fun 4th of July weekend. Thanks for listening today. I'll talk to you on Monday.